Last month, George Zimmerman, a 28-year-old nursing student, was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old African-American high school junior. Nearly every American now knows the names of both men, who lived in the same small city in Central Florida, and about their fatal encounter on the night of February 26th. The case restarted a painful conversation about race in America, but it also opened an equally sensitive issue about civilians who participate in law enforcement. We might call them shadow police. Zimmerman was the organizer of a neighborhood watch group. He was on self-appointed patrol that night. He had no training in police procedures and no authorization to use his gun. In fact, when he radioed the local police dispatcher that a stranger was acting suspiciously, he was told in no uncertain terms not to follow the man. There are hundreds of such neighborhood watches or citizens patrol groups across the U.S., and a large number of civilians who volunteer as auxiliary police or special police reserves. They're part of a respected American tradition of community self-defense. But where do we set the line between civilian policing and uniformed law enforcement? What's the boundary between preserving public safety and vigilantism? At a time when police forces around the country are looking for ways to stretch tight budgets, these have become crucial questions. I'm Steve Handelman. Today on Criminal Justice Matters, we've invited several people to help us explore them. John Sodaro is a student at John Jay College and a former New York policeman. He's been working on a special reporting project for the Crime Report, examining auxiliary police in the city. Professor Robert McCire is a deputy chair of the Department of Security, Fire, and Emergency Management at John Jay College, and one of the country's notable authorities on policing. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. I guess let's start with you, Professor McCire. The obvious question for us here in New York City is what happened in Florida. Could that happen in New York City?
Well, it could happen in New York City. It's not likely to happen in New York City, but we have neighborhood patrol groups that are in every part of the city. They're formal and informal, but I think we have fewer weapons in our city than in Florida, than in Virginia, than in North Carolina.
To hold weapons, right?
Yes, yes, and we have a sense of our limitations as citizens if we participate in these groups that perhaps weren't in place in Florida. So it's possible, but anything is possible.
What do you mean we have a sense of limitations? You mean people in New York are different or have a different sense of their responsibilities as neighborhood watch
Well,
civilians?
yes, clearly the neighborhood watch understands they are not cops, they are not cop wannabes, they are private citizens protecting their neighborhoods, and nothing more than that. And they're doing something honorable in doing this. You know, we have had citizens protecting their neighborhoods historically, going back even in English history before the Normans invaded. In the 700, 800 years, there was a night watch. So this idea of protecting one's community is really an old one, and citizens have a role in it.
And it's become a bit, as I understand it, become a bit more intense, particularly after 9/11, when we're told that as citizens we have a responsibility, if we see something, to say something. That kind of adds to the pressure a little bit on police, doesn't it? That they have to fold in neighborhood watches into their activities.
Yes, yes, that's right. But it really started earlier than that. When we had the big crime wave rising from the late 60s and the 70s, that's when organizations really started beginning to be seriously considered, and communities would turn to citizens or hire local contract guard companies to patrol the neighborhood. That's when it really started as an earnest effort.
In fact, it was Kitty Genovese, the case in New York City, that really revived the notion of neighborhood watches.
Yes.
Is that right? I mean, tell us about
yes.
what led that?
That showed that the neighborhood really didn't respond, that there was a citizen in need, but they all assumed it's somebody else's duty, so I won't call the police. Now there's much more of a sense among New Yorkers that they have some responsibility. If someone is in need, they should call police, call 911. We're told that every day.
So the real question, I guess, that comes up as it happened in Florida is what the relationship is between the police and the civilians who patrol. And let me turn to you, John. You've done a study on the role of auxiliary police in New York City, and we found, I think you found, that it's expanding considerably to I guess, the displeasure of some New York City police people. And why is that? I mean, why are they not happy with this expansion?
Well, as a former cop, it's one of those things. It's a pride thing. You know, going through the academy, earning your way to wear that patch. I think it's a matter of them having that same kind of uniform with just that auxiliary across the top. I mean, it doesn't create friction, but there's sometimes there's times where you should show up to a job, and if an auxiliary is there, just, you know, if they try to overstep to what a cop would see as overstepping, like, well, we got it from here, kind of attitude. But I think as I've started working on this story that I'm doing, I see the more importance that they have. I see that the higher ups in the New York City Police Department really utilize them well, especially in the subway systems. Recently, with the rashes of thefts from technology, iPads, stuff like that, Police Chief Joe Fox has implemented getting these auxiliaries down there as a heavy presence, sometimes 200 a day in the subway systems here in New York as a visible deterrent to especially crimes like that.
But in some cases, this is less of a public safety issue than an economic issue, right? I mean, we're seeing police forces increasingly contract out policing in many parts of the country because of the budget restraints they're operating under. In New York City, I think you found that's one of the cases.
Well, they're losing a lot of cops retention-wise. They're not holding on to their cops after 20 years. The city's department's down number-wise. So I think there's always been around that 4,000 to 5,000 auxiliary member force here. But I think the way they run the program gets a lot of auxiliaries more involved, for them to really feel more involved in just like a neighborhood watch. You know, that's
Right.
got the uniform on, that feels more pride, patrolling in an actual city squad car.
I mean, auxiliaries are a step up from the
Correct.
ordinary neighborhood watch. They have some training.
Correct.
How much training do they have?
They get over 50 hours at the police academy, self-defense and learning some laws.
Whereas there are no standards for neighborhood watch groups or civilian patrols.
Nothing whatsoever. They have no instruction except from one member of the patrol to another. So it's really a risky situation relative to auxiliary police.
So even in New York City, where we have auxiliary police, we have neighborhood watch groups, how do they interact, and how do they then interact with the cops themselves?
Well, auxiliary police have a supportive role. They're at parades, they're on patrol in non-dangerous circumstances. They are not investigators of crime. If they see something that is a misdemeanor or a felony, they're not supposed to intervene, but to watch, observe, report, and immediately call 911 or directly to the police department with the radios they have.
Are we, I mean, as we move towards getting more auxiliary police, putting the issue of neighborhood watches aside for the moment, for economic reasons, is that risking public safety?
I'm not sure we're doing it just for economic reasons. As I said a moment ago, there's this long history of citizens playing roles in community prevention. And every police commander one encounters who has any experience on the realities of doing his or her job well knows that cooperation with the community is vital for success. And they can't say, this is totally our job. Please, if you want to communicate, send us a text message. No, it's not that way at all. They want participation. And auxiliary policing is a manifestation of that.
But at the same time, there have to be procedures.
Oh, yes, of course, of course. And there are, as John said, what we make available for these fine men and women who are auxiliary police is a good basis in preparing them for their service.
We had a situation last summer in New York City, in Williamsburg, in the ultra-Orthodox community, the Jewish ultra-Orthodox community, where an 8-year-old boy was kidnapped, went missing, and the first line of defense in Williamsburg was the Shomrim, which is a religious-oriented civilian patrol group. And from what I understand about the issues then, that the family went to the patrol group, the neighborhood watches, in effect, before they went to the police. And then the neighborhood watch, the Shomrim, did not inform the police that the child was missing until about 2.5 hours later. When this came out, Commissioner Kelly said that was a problem, although he's not saying that they might have avoided the child's death. He was later found dead. But still, that highlights an issue about exactly what sometimes these neighborhood watchers or civilian patrols act as a protective or an insulative force for a community rather than actually helping police do their duties. You were talking about a case earlier with Shomrim in, I think,
actually,
Philadelphia.
Baltimore. There's actually a case going on right now that's went to trial. Two Shomrim patrolmen attacked a 15-year-old male down there, claiming self-defense kind of deal. They tracked him through the neighborhood, and that trial's proceeding right now. But as far as like when I worked in 7-0 dealing with the Shomrim, it was one of those things where it's a little bit different than any other watch group because it is so religiously tied. I think a lot of people that wouldn't speak up to regular neighborhood watches, or if they saw an auxiliary or regular cop in the street, they would go to their regular Shomrim patrol. But it's one of those things where the community affairs, NYPD officers are always telling them, we have to know about it. It's not you guys don't take action, and it's always something they know is they don't take action. But just in the Orthodox community, I think a lot of people, language-wise and comfort-wise, would rather go to them first. But I could see, in that case, where it did have some time span that could have affected the actual investigation.
Yeah, I don't mean to isolate necessarily the Shomrim. I mean, there are other examples of religious-oriented neighborhood watch groups, like I think the Amish have their own groups that are meant to protect their community and often act as an insulator because the community does not want any of its problems to be out there more in the public eye. And then, of course, we have
Native Americans.
And Native Americans, that's a whole other issue. And we have also the Guardian Angels, which are, famously or notoriously self-appointed guardians of the public order, although they've, I guess, tamed themselves somewhat. But, I mean, with all this proliferation of groups, isn't it time that we got some national standards on how these groups operate and how they interact with police?
I don't think we're likely to see national standards. This isn't the kind of country to do that. But we can have local standards, and it can be a welcoming process where individuals who want to be eyes and ears and respondents just take a little training. It doesn't have to come to the 50 hours that auxiliary police go through, but a few hours. And this would also be an opportunity where people who have some aggressiveness, some chip on their shoulder, some bias that needs to be controlled, are weeded out of this group.
Should we make it clear that as a basic first step, these people should not be armed, whether it's auxiliary police or not armed? Am I correct?
Correct. No, they're not armed, and that's even with neighborhood watches. The Sheriff's Association, in their guidebook, says absolutely no. It doesn't matter if your state's where you can carry concealed weapons in your state. When you go on a patrol in a neighborhood watch, you should not have a weapon, and you should work in pairs. They make that clear in their guidelines. So it's one of those things. The only advantage to like an auxiliary is to have that visible uniform presence, and then also I think the big thing too is have that radio life link right to the police department. They're on the same radio lengths, waves as the actual cops, so they can make that quick call as opposed to pulling out a phone. But I think education is the way to go.
But then again, they do put themselves in danger. So they are, in a sense, defenseless in the community if they're not armed or if they're not.
Yes. Auxiliary police now can be fitted with bullet-resistant vests to keep them safer when they're in the public. But there is danger, though the level of danger isn't high. There is more danger than being an average citizen.
So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, in this area. Thanks, both of you, for coming down today.
Thanks, Steve.
The Trayvon Martin case sent a shudder of alarm through the African American community. President Obama explained why. If he had a son, said the president, he would look like Trayvon Martin. But no such explanation was necessary here at John Jay College, where a substantial number of our students come from communities of color in New York. Last month, the college held a teach-in to provide a forum for their anxieties and their anger. We invited the organizer of the teach-in, Professor C. Jama Adams, chair of the Department of Africana Studies, to tell us about the event. Professor Adams, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start and talk a little bit about why you felt having a teach-in was necessary on an event that happened so far away from New York.
Well, first of all, we're an institution of learning and we're an institution of criminal justice. There was a lot of pain and discussion about this incident taking place in the community. And we thought it would be a good idea to pull the community together, students, professors, administrators, to talk about what happened and express feelings and possibly actions that we could take.
Did people feel that it could happen here in New York City? Obviously, similar things have happened when we talk about stop and frisk and racial profiling.
Our students, who I can speak the most about, are very sadly cynical about the police, about the capacity of the society to protect them. So their assumption is, yes, this could happen here. They're subject to all kinds of violations on a routine basis. So they weren't particularly surprised. They were outraged, but not surprised.
But this wasn't a police shooting.
But the idea that justice, that law enforcement broadly does not protect you, is how they would have explained it. He was acting as an agent of protection. And the history of the black community is the sense that we are not protected. So this just fits into that tradition.
Why do we feel that we need, I mean, the theme of our talk, of our program today generally is the issue of shadow policing. How law enforcement deal with minority communities, with the African American community, the Latino community is another issue entirely, and we've had programs on that. But here we've got a situation where these are civilian groups. Some would say acting as vigilantes, others would say they're protecting the community. I mean, is this a secondary problem, a secondary issue that we ought to worry about? I mean, we've had issues like the Jama 6 in Louisiana. We've had issues of the African-American father in Queens who was arrested because he was protecting his son against white kids who he felt were threatening his son. So it's an issue of taking the law into your own hands, of protecting your community because the police can't do it or you don't trust the police to do that.
It's troubling, and I don't have any to answer for you, but what I do know is there's a sense across the full spectrum of the society, rich, poor, middle, upper, lower, old, young, people do not feel safe. You can lose your house, you can lose your job, you can lose your life. The reality of that is one thing. The perception that people have out there is that you can't trust the institutions, you can't trust the banks, you can't trust the police, you can't trust the drug companies, you can't trust anybody. And it's really, really troubling. So what we see is, on one hand, crime is reportedly going down. Also, we've been told the amount of guns ownership it's been going down over the last 4 or 5 years. Yet you have laws like, stand your ground. You have incredibly high levels of abuse of prescription drugs. So there's something going on out there where there's a perception that we are not safe, and it plays itself out in 1,001 ways. Get rid of the Mexicans, lock up the women again. I don't have a neat answer for it, but there's something much larger going on in the community about fear and paranoia.
How do you explain that? I mean, is it the economic crisis? Is it?
I think it's a lot of it's many factors. I mean, the job situation is changing drastically, where working class jobs that paid well have disappeared for the most part. You have to be really well educated to get a well-paying job. Secondly, we have a situation with a healthcare system that, with an aging population, that people like me and others are worrying, what's going to happen when I get sick? Who's going to take care of me? So you've got all these free-floating anxieties. And in addition to that, you have a long, disgraceful cultural history that when there's a problem, you look for scapegoats. And who are the scapegoats? It gets channeled into the blacks. Whichever immigrant group is not the flavor of the moment. People forget, 100 and so years ago, it was the Irish and the Italians. Now it's the Mexicans and the Haitians. So we've always had this anxiety in our society, and it locates itself in these subordinate groups. So this doesn't surprise me.
But we've become less violent as a society in general than we were in the past, even 10, 20 years ago. At least that's what the crime statistics tell us. An incident like Trayvon Martin suggests that we still are more combustible than we thought we were, I guess.
Well, I agree that the physical violence may not be as bad, but what we've done is it's almost as if we're trying to eradicate human nature. So what we have are these zero tolerance policies for this and zero tolerance policy for that. So we're in the position where we're expelling 4-year-old boys from preschool, expelling them for doing what 4-year-old boys do. So I think we're suppressing it in ways that's creating anxieties, creating problems in other areas. And you can talk about physical violence, but you talk about the administrative violence, losing your house, or you're in the emergency room and somebody comes up to you and says, well, if you can't pay for this, you can't get treatment. So I'm not sure the violence is decreasing. I think the nature of it is changing. It is more subtle, it's more nuanced, it's not necessarily physical, but it's there.
So we're more tense as a society.
Yes, because you just don't know what is going to happen.
I mean, of course, one might argue that since 9/11, we've been more tense in general as a society, because now, in addition to everything else we have to fear, we're fearing terrorists under the bed, coming in from any direction. But obviously a case like this, where you have a particularly domestic confrontation, which has nothing to do with terrorism, it has to do with strangers, or the perception that there are strangers outside who are coming to get you. I mean, that seems to be have been the most interesting aspect of this case.
Yeah.
I mean, both of the perpetrators, both of the players in this, one was African American, the other was half Latino, Peruvian and half white.
It was interesting how that case came together, where you see this coincidence of issues. So one, for example, Trayvon School had some sort of a zero tolerance policy for drugs or drug-related thing. So what we've done to our schools is we have insisted that they fix everything without necessarily giving them the resources, the training, the counselors, the system to sort of diffuse situations and look into them. So for example, I mentioned earlier the expulsion of boys from preschool. What they find, you put a social worker in there and the expulsions drop because the school gets a resource for managing the problem. So I don't know Trayvon School, and I'm not blaming the school, but it would have been interesting to know if they had had an alternative to expulsion or suspension policy to say, what's going on with these drugs? Let us talk with him. Let's bring his parents in. Let's try and work it. What the schools are forced to do is export the problem, because most of them just don't have the resources. On one hand, they don't have the resources to deal with children as children, the problems that children will present with, and they're under the gun to increase their scores.
So I mean, this is beyond a racial issue. I mean, the initial take on this was that this was a racial issue, it's racial profiling. And now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that.
You go to Vermont, you go to Iowa, you go to, quote, the heartland, and poor white kids are in trouble over drugs and suspensions and stuff like that. Middle class and upper middle class parents get private treatment, so you don't hear about those issues. Now, I'm not saying everybody's in trouble in the same way, but the problems that we tend to locate in the black culture, as I was saying earlier, we tend to say, oh, this is a black problem, this is a Latino problem. It's a much wider problem. The problem being, however, is that blacks become the container for it. It's, oh, the guy in the hoodie is a criminal.
Right. When
the criminal aspect of it is not there, it's just a kid profiling. And people have to remember that despite the fact that many blacks are poor, 2/3 of those kids do not get into any trouble with the police. They have no criminal record. They live in these communities. What you find with them is not criminal. The issue that I struggle with in terms of poor black youth is not their criminal activities. Most of them are not criminals. It's their underperformance, their depression, their preoccupation with being safe. That's what I worry about with them, so that they don't do as well as they could because they have this other agenda. They always have to worry, is somebody going to shoot me? Is the police going to arrest me? We heard that something like 90% of stop and frisk results in no charges.
Yes.
Yet 20% of those cases escalate into some kind of physical interaction with the police. They walk around with this, and they have to be vigilant.
What do you think was the main takeaway that the students at the teach-in took from the Trayvon Martin case and then from the teach-in? What
they took from the Trayvon Martin case is that they are not safe and that they are not protected.
As African Americans?
Yes. And I think Latino Americans as well. And there's certain, there are poor white communities where they also don't feel safe. Maybe not as many, but they exist. Okay, but we don't hear, because we have sort of racialized the problem, we don't realize how broad it is. What they took away from the teach-in was that some action steps are possible, that they've got to become active in politics, they have to vote, they have to talk to their congressmen, because the congressmen, the representatives ignore the youth because ostensibly they don't vote. And when they look at their numbers, it's the older folks who are saying, we want to be safe from these kids, when in fact these kids are not a danger to them.
And what did you take away personally?
I was humbled by their creativity, their passion for their issue, and they're asking for leadership. How can we serve? How can we make a difference? Remember, our average age is 19. So they don't have a larger worldview yet in terms of how to, in a sophisticated way, organize for action. And they're saying, what can we do to make a difference? And it's for us, the elders, I'm not sure if we're wiser, but the older ones, to say, here are some steps you can take.
What message should we take from the trial itself? Are we all watching it, obviously?
This, I think, on the level of Trayvon and Zimmerman, it's in a sense a lose-lose situation. That Trayvon is dead. Zimmerman, from the little I've heard, is a person who's got mental health issues. So what I would want to take from the trial is what it tells us about the larger system, the availability of mental health services, the capacity to help with this drug problem we have in this country, because that's in a part what triggered Trayvon being where he was, and just the death of community. It's just like, you know, in a different community, he wouldn't have been shot. But we were all like vigilant and watching, and we're scared, and that's what came together there. Whether he gets off or not, it's a legal issue I can't speak to.
Professor Adams, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
We asked some of our John Jay students to convey their feelings about Trayvon Martin's death and how it resonated with their lives. Let's listen to some of their poetry.
Haiku by Sandra Thomas.
Beware, all you black inner city hooded boys that stand your own ground. Free verse by Juliana Kapovitch. Must we overcompensate to dissipate the hate that flows through the veins? Blood, same color as mine, yet my skin color is a problem. Must I cover my color with suit and tie, with eloquent speech, whitewash who I am, like a white flag of retreat?
Free verse by Sydney Adams. The pavement whispers of blood, of shouting voices, fear, pleading, ignorant suspicion, unequal race, boy versus man, gun versus body, race cannot be won so. The pavement soaks with blood.
We'll have to wait for the trial to learn the full story about what happened that night. But one thing already seems clear. Unless we get straight the roles and responsibilities of civilians who act as shadow police in our cities and communities, there are likely to be more Trayvon Martins. To keep following this issue, please visit our website, The Crime Report, at www.thecrimereport.org. Meanwhile, tell us what you think. Thanks for watching.